Welcome to the Makin's Clay Design Studio. I'm Cindi McGee. Today I'm going to show you how to make this fun steampunk styled mosaic trinket box. One of the many range of applications of Makin's clay that makes it unique is that when it's dry and rolled thin, it can be die cut, cut with scissors, or even craft punched, which makes it ideal for pieces like mosaic. You can use all of those scrap pieces of clay that you may have or extra pieces of clay at the end of a project, roll them thin, texture them randomly, rubber stamp them, set them aside for later use, and then cut them with scissors and make something truly unique. Let's get started. The first step is to open our clay. So remove the outer packaging, and then inside the clay is double wrapped. You would cut and remove the outer wrapping, leaving this inner wrapping. At this point you can either cut off the amount of clay you're going to use, so if it's just a small amount you can just cut it free, and then store any clay that you're not using at that time in a zipper bag or another airtight container with a moist towelette or a damp paper towel to keep it fresh. If you're working with the clay and it begins to dry out a bit, you can spritz it with a little water and then work it in your hand and it will come back to the original consistency. It is an air dry product, so you do need to keep the moisture. We're going to use this entire package of black, so I'm going to open it the rest of the way. And peel away that inner wrapping. It's soft and pliable and ready to use right out of the package. There's no conditioning necessary, making it perfect for use by all age groups. Now, you can see that there is clay left on this packaging, but that is not wasted. You can either scrape it free, or I think it's easier to take the clay I've removed and pounce it against that plastic. And you can see it's lifting away. So you will actually have very little waste. I'm going to open my brown and my natural clay. The first step is to roll the clay. I've started to flatten it a bit in my hands, and I'm going to roll it the rest of the way in the Makin's Professional Ultimate Clay Machine. The Ultimate Clay Machine has non-stick rollers, making it ideal for any type of polymer clay, and it also has 9 thickness settings. On a number 9, it's paper thin. Let's get started rolling. You always start on a number 1. That is the widest setting. Place your clay and turn the handle. There is an optional motor also, which is great, especially if you're working with classroom groups. So we'll start the process. It's a big piece of clay. And then we'll go up to a number 2. And then for this project, we're stopping at a setting number 3. So you can see, even at a lower setting like 3, you get a lot of rolled clay out of that one package of black. That's a 120 gram package we started with. So the next step is going to be to texture our clay sheets. I did the same process with the brown and the natural clay. Let's go to the next step. To make all of these great different textures and colors for our mosaic trinket box, I'm using a couple of different techniques to texture my sheet of black Makin's clay. The first is to use a Makin's texture sheet, and I'm using an assortment of them here for a different effect. Makin's texture sheets work on either side. One side will set the image into the clay, and the other will raise it up a bit. As you can see, this was done with the same texture sheet. Now, if you ever have an issue with them sticking to your clay, you can add a bit of cornstarch, and that works as a release agent. To do that, you'd place the sheet over the clay, and I use my fingers. You can use a clay roller. Some people will roll their texture sheets through the Ultimate Clay Machine. But I like the control of my fingers, and I can lift and I can see if I'm getting the texture I want or if I need to go a little more firmly. And I just mixed them up because I wanted a bit of a collage type effect, and I wanted different types and different shapes when I cut them into the pieces to make my mosaic. So I used the different ones. And then for the other pieces of clay, I did the same thing on my brown and my black clay. I did not texture my natural clay. I'm going to show you what I did with that in a minute. The other way I textured my clay was with rubber stamps. Rubber stamps are a perfect way to texture Makin's clay. You can stamp with or without a permanent ink in fresh clay or on dry sheets of clay with an ink. Let's use this fun gear for our steampunk, and you just press that stamp into your sheet of clay in a random pattern. And you can mix up your stamps, like we have all these great steampunk stamps from Judykins we're using for this project. Now they look great this way, but how did I get these fantastic textured images to pop from these sheets of clay? I used metallic lusters, and I'll show you that next. So how I made these metallic colors pop from these great textured pieces of Makin's clay is with a cream wax luster. These are DecoArt's metallic lusters, and I really love the effect they make. You can also use acrylic paint or permanent inks or even oil paint and other colorants to shade the clay. But these are one of my favorites. You can use a brush, but I just use my fingers. And if you rub them over the surface, it makes that texture really highlight from the background clay. The goal is not to cover the color of the background clay, just to make your texture pop and add that metallic feel for our steampunk project. And it works equally well on the stamped images and on the images that you've textured with the texture sheet. For the last component, I'm using the natural clay, which we did not texture, and I'm giving it a stamped and antiqued feel. To begin, I took my flat sheet of the natural clay, and again, you can do this when the clay is fresh or when the clay is dry. And you want to stamp with a permanent ink pad. It is important that you use a permanent ink pad. And I'm not trying to texture this time as much as I am just to create a pattern, because when we cut our mosaic pieces, we want different steampunk elements to use on our trinket box. So you would cover in any of the areas you want and let that ink dry. You can heat set it if you want to speed that process. And next I'll show you how to antique it. Once your permanent ink has set, it's time for the antiquing effect. And I'm using DecoArt's cream wax for this. I'm using this golden brown and a paper towel. And I'm going to rub it over the surface of that stamped clay. And then while it's still wet, wipe away most of it. And I love the vintage effect that you're left with. Gives it an aged feel. Now it's time to assemble our trinket box. To cut your different mosaic shapes in different rectangles and squares, you can either cut the clay when it's still fresh with scissors or after it's dry, because of the fact that Makin's clay stays flexible when it is dry. I cut random sized squares and rectangles from the assorted pieces that we textured and stamped. And then it was time to assemble our box. I'm using a repurposed coffee tin, but you could use anything as a base. I like to upcycle, so this was a perfect option. You want a good, strong adhesive like Beacon's 527 so that your pieces will stay adhered to your box. I just started with one of my stamped images, sort of as a focal point. And then began building my mosaic around it. Again, if some pieces are too small, you can even come back too large. You can come back afterwards and trim them as needed with a pair of scissors. Because the clay remains flexible, you can also even wrap it around the rounded edges of this tin, and I would just hold it in place for a few minutes until that glue begins to set up strong. So I continued all around all the sides of my box, and you can see it adhered to the round sides perfectly. And then I did the center of the removable cover. I made some round clay balls as little legs of my box and used the same 527 to attach them to here, and then gave them a touch of copper with that metallic luster. Now I'm going to show you how I did this faux leather trim around our trinket box. To make this faux leather trim around the lid of our trinket box, I'm using the Ultimate Clay extruder. And I'm going to turn the handle to bring my plunger back. And then you would roll the piece of clay that you're going to extrude small enough to fit into the barrel of the extruder. We're using disc 31, which is this curved C. So you place it into the bottom of the cover and then screw it back into place over the clay. And then you just turn the handle. And it will begin to extrude the clay in the shape of the disc that you've chosen. When you're finished, you just remove it. And now it is important when you're using the Ultimate Clay extruder to remove the cap and remove any extra clay in there. You don't want that air dry clay to dry in that barrel. We're going to set it aside for now. Now we're going to take the piece that we extruded, it's in that C shape, and place it around the lid. Now we'll pretend that the top of this is mosaiced, like this one. I put a little bit of my 527 adhesive around the edge, and then started, and that C shape fits perfectly around the edge of that lid. And I kept going all the way around, and then I just cut it off where I was done and smoothed it with my fingers. If you need, you can moisten your finger a bit and help smooth that seam where your clay meets the clay at the end of your piece. Now the last thing I did to kind of give it a faux leather effect was I used a bit of tin foil, and I just crumpled up a small piece and pushed it into that clay when it was still fresh, all around the edge. And when you do that, you get a feel of leather. Black Makin's clay is one of my favorite colors because you can do so many things with it, and it really does emulate black leather in a lot of ways. So I went all the way around with just a light touch because I thought our steampunk metallic box needed a bit of a leather feel too. I hope you can see the broad range of possibilities of using sheets of Makin's clay cut into mosaic tiles for a variety of creative projects. We also did this great faux leather technique around the top, and the brown or the black clay really does emulate leather when it's rolled thin especially. Cosplay and Renaissance people often make costume pieces with it because you can also stitch Makin's clay. It's a truly unique modeling medium. We invite you to explore the possibilities of adding Makin's clay to your creative projects. And tune in next time to the Makin's Clay Design Studio for more creative ideas.